What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikiPikaPapa, and here we are with our monthly view of Sword and Shield and how the top 20 singles cards from all of the sets that have booster boxes have performed. And on the next one, we're gonna look and see how the booster boxes themselves have moved. And the exciting thing for me this month is we have been doing this officially for a year. So back in September of 2023, I had this decision. I was like, I wanna be able to look at the hobby in a more macro level and I wanna track it over time. So what did I do? I'm a data nerd, so I started warehousing all of this information. And I don't just do it for Sword and Shield. I do it for XY, I do it for Sun and Moon, and I do it for Scarlet and Violet as well. So I have all of this information. And as exciting as this is to look at now, what I always said was, hey, listen, in the long run, when we start to get to the next eras, like Scarlet and Violet, for example, that's when this is going to be really applicable, right? We all know at what point in the Sword and Shield life cycle I started keeping this information. Well, inevitably, Scarlet and Violet will eventually be at the same point in the life cycle. And we'll be able to look at how Sword and Shield performed. And it doesn't mean Scarlet and Violet will do the same, but it is always good to take lessons from the past, apply them to the present, to give us some idea of what might happen in the future. Now, besides me being super excited, this is the 1 year mark, we're starting to see Sword and Shield singles cards finally level off a little bit. And if you look, man, it got crazy there for a little bit, right? There was FOMO in the market. Booster boxes were selling out in Pokemon Center. People thought this was going to be the last time in the world to get their Sword and Shield chase cards. So we saw the price really spike up. April, May, June, you see that. I mean, heck, in May it was up 35% versus the previous month. In June it was up 11%. We knew inevitably the prices were going to come down, and that's what we've seen the last 2 months, right? In July it was down 9.38%, and then August it was down 10%. Now, what we didn't know is when we would start to see a little bit of the panic kind of subside, right? We never know where the bottom is, and if I was a betting man, I would say that this will continue to drop over the next couple months. But it does look like the big pop is over, and at least the big flop is over. So understanding that and getting an idea of what might happen in the future is what I'm really excited about moving forward, because as I looked at some singles cards on the Monday video, and as we're going to look at a couple singles cards here, I think there's some really cool and compelling stories that are being written. So as excited as I am to talk about the pop and flop being done, it is really cool to be able to say, listen, over the last year, the top 20 singles cards from all of the sets that have booster boxes in Sword and Shield is up 19.4%. And we know that because we warehouse this data. So even with all of the long period of flatness from November to March, even with the crazy spike from April to June, even with the drop from June to August, all the way through the last year with all of that craziness, steady Eddie, just if you bought in the beginning and held to the end, even with all the craziness, you'd be up 19.4%. And as exciting as that is, you know we got to, on the next slide, look at the booster boxes. So when I look at the booster boxes, my gosh, very similar story actually. If you look on the left where I have the booster box aggregate values there and how they moved over time, the red and the green and the red really correlates with how the singles cards moved. But what doesn't correlate is the degree, the degree, I guess that's what I'd call it, like the degree, the severity of the moves. You'll see that this is a much smoother, much more cohesive graph versus the last one. And yes, it went through this big period of spike, right? Starting in January, February, I think people could feel Sword and Shield was going to sell out soon. And then guess what? They started to pop off one by one on the Pokemon Center here in the US, and people were FOMO. People were jumping in left and right. Booster box prices got absolutely crazy. But the difference between the booster boxes and the singles cards is, look at it the last 3 months. Yes, it's come down, but nowhere near to the degree that we saw in those singles card prices, right? They have retained and they have held on to so much of their value compared to the singles cards. A much smoother, much easier ride. And that's the thing with Sealed, right? Like, Sealed is always being opened, so the overall population is always decreasing. And guess what? When you open Sealed, what increases? The singles card population, right? So two products that operate very, very differently, right? Sealed is always decreasing, and through that decreasing in Sealed product, more singles cards are hitting the market. So a really cool takeaway. And I don't normally do this, but I'm actually going to flip back. So look at this graph here of the booster box prices, and then again, look at how the singles cards perform. Just really, really sharp up, really sharp down. Now it's starting to flatten out. And what you see here is you see some much smoother, much more organic. Yeah, there was still a bit of FOMO, right, as things were selling out. But again, not just this 2 month spike. This was gradual over time, and now you see it starting to hold on to a whole lot of that. So really cool story in booster boxes. And again, super pumped to say that over the last year, the booster boxes from Sword and Shield, if you bought them all in September and held them till now, you'd be up 34.1%. Really, really cool stuff right here. Now, before I get into the rest of the video, as you can tell, we are a data-driven channel. And if this kind of stuff excites you, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. And if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I got a small channel. We do a ton of work behind the scenes, and those three things go a long way in helping us out. So I really appreciate it. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to look at some some single sets, and we're gonna look at some single cards along the way. Now, Lost Origin is a awesome set, but it has been getting hammered as of late. I mean, absolutely hammered. And as you can see, this month was no different. But what's interesting is if you look at the Lost Origin booster box price, it's at $211. It has really separated itself from Silver Tempest, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's separated from Astral Radiance and Brilliant Stars, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But it's right up there with Fusion Strike. It's right up there with Chilling Reign. Like, there is no other Evolving Skies, right? So when you think about the other big three, I mean, Lost Origin is the one that's right up there with the other ones, which is really interesting. The other thing that's cool is we talked about Silver Tempest, and what's fascinating to me is even though we saw that big FOMO where everybody was piling into Sword and Shield stuff, guess what? Silver Tempest is still available on the US Pokemon Center. So I don't know if Silver Tempest was absolutely printed into the ground, or I don't know if there was just enough supply of it so it pushed through the demand and now people are kind of on to bigger and better things in the Scarlet and Violet era, or I don't know if it's some combination of the two, but Silver Tempest just does not seem to want to go away on the Pokemon Center website, and we won't truly know what Silver Tempest can do until it does flip to sold out. Now, we're going to talk about two cards from Lost Origin at a pretty high level. First off is that Aerodactyl card. Last month it was coming in right at or a little below $100, and we've seen a little bit of a price jump, up 3% over last month. We talk about these round support lines, right? For whatever reason, the hobby, numbers that end in 25 or start with 25, right, or end in 100, like those are numbers that the market seems to rally around. So at that $100 price point, we saw some support for Aerodactyl. But the big chase card from Lost Origin continues to see some pressure, right? It spiked all the way up to $500. And if you look at that graph, it to me at least looks like it's going to continue to come down. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I'll never tell you where the bottom is. I'll never tell you when a card's going to make a turn. I will use lessons from the past to try and understand how current cards are moving and how they might move in the future. But this card, at least to me, seems to look like it is still moving down. And when I talk about Lost Origin being oversold, this is a fantastic card. This is a high demand, awesome chase card from what is looking like it's going to be one of the top 4 sets from the Sword and Shield era. And it also has the lowest gem rate out of all of the Sword and Shield alt arts, right? This is a sub 50% gem rate. And when you think about all the other cards, heck, even the Moonbreon's a 75% gem rate. So it's coming from a great set. It's a really hard gem rate. The singles price is still continuing to come down. We talk about those round numbers. Is it going to find support at 325? Is it going to be 300? Like, I'm going to keep an eye on this and see where this thing flattens out, but it's going to be really fun to watch over the next couple months. Now, the next two sets right here, Astral Radiance and Brilliant Stars. Now, as I said, Lost Origin from a booster box price perspective is kind of separating itself from Astral Radiance and Brilliant Stars, but I will tell you this, if you look at the top 20 cards from Astral Radiance and Brilliant Stars, I'll put them up against any set in the Sword and Shield era. There is some amazing art in both of these sets. And another thing that's really cool about these two is if you look at the top 2 cards for both of these sets, a lot of times I talk about strength in the top 3. I like to see those chase cards kind of start to make the move first before some of the other ancillary cards start to make the moves. In Astral Radiance and Brilliant Stars, you see both of their top 2 cards have some pretty strong movements month over month. And then just comparing them, I mean, when you look, the chase cards are pretty much neck and neck. You look at the number 2 cards are pretty much neck and neck. Heck, the 3 and 4 cards for Astral Radiance are actually more expensive than Brilliant Stars, but Brilliant Stars, I'm telling you right now, Brilliant Stars is a stunning lineup. You got Charizards in there, you got Trainer Gallery cards in there, you got Umbreons in there, you have all kinds of things. And the card that we're going to talk about from Brilliant Stars is a card that I actually think is a little bit, actually a lot of it oversold. And this is the Arceus V Alt Art. And this is an absolute stunner. And when you look at this price graph right here, we talked about how in that first video, or the first page, excuse me, we saw the top 20 singles cards spiked up and came down and started to flatten out, but it did still retain a lot of those gains, right? It didn't spike down below the previous mark, but this card is down 21.62% over the last year, which is fascinating to me. Again, you have an awesome, Arceus is a huge name, right? You got an awesome name like Arceus on an amazing piece of art from a great set like Brilliant Stars, and you can get this for sub $25 right now. You know, I don't know, this card is absolutely fire. I did a video on Monday on some of the alt arts that I'm going after, and I foolishly omitted this one. This one is firmly on my list of cards that I'm looking really hard at right now in that post Sword and Shield spike era. The next sets we're going to look at, Fusion Strike and Evolving Skies. And over the last 3 months, as you saw in that first graph, like all of these sets have really been taking a beating. And as you've seen in the original slides we've been looking at, like they are still continuing to take a beating. Fusion Strike is the first one over the last 3 months to actually flip just a little bit green in the overall top 20 cards. Not a lot, it's at positive 0%, which means it is less than 0.5% positive, but it is in the upward stance. So hey, that is really good. And then you see the Gengar up there, right? The chase card, we talked about these round support lines, right? It seems to be finding a lot of support right around the $300 mark, so that might be where this card kind of just settles out for a little while. And then two top cards in Evolving Skies group. We got the Moonbryon and we got the Ray Ray right there. But one of the things I talked about a lot about Evolving Skies is, yes, it's the big set from Sword and Shield, and yes, it has amazing artwork top to bottom, and pull rates are absolutely abysmal, but it is very hard for Pokemon sets to maintain a ton of cards over that $200 price point. Now, even Team Up, I mean, if you look at Team Up's top 20 singles cards, which I'll show you guys here in a couple weeks once I pull that view together as well, even Team Up only has a few cards over $200, and that is from Sun and Moon, much less printed. It was short printed in the Sun and Moon era, right? Like, there is a totally different print run from a totally different era. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting from a book I was reading the other day, they were talking about investing in assets, and they were arguing back and forth. And one of the things that they talked about is there are always buyers for super premium assets. They were talking about real estate, and they were like, hey, listen, no matter what's going on in the real estate market, like, there are always people who are buying these really high-end homes. And if you invest in super premium assets, you will usually end up A-okay. And it made me think of the Moonbryon. So I thought it'd be interesting to see how the Moonbryon has performed, even though we've seen these aggressive ups and aggressive downs and all of these big chase cards like the Tina that are still coming down. But the Moonbryon card right here has held steady. Matter of fact, over the last couple months, the Moonbryon has actually been up. Sure, it spiked, and sure, it gave up some of that, but when you compare this to a lot of the other cards that we've looked at, guess what? It has held on to a ton of it. Now, I don't know what the next Moonbryon is going to be. I have no clue, but at least I know that this card, and we saw the same thing with Lovebirds from Team Up while we're talking about Team Up, and it pops into my brain. We saw the same thing from the Lovebirds card. Like, whatever the big chase cards are, at least from the era, they are going to perform well. It doesn't matter what's going on in the macro market or the economy or the Pokemon hobby as a whole, they're going to perform really well. And that's a great lesson. That can at least make you feel really good. So really cool to see the way this card has performed, at least compared to its peers as of late. Next ones, Chilling Reign and Battle Styles. And my gosh, I have so much to say about these two sets, but I'll try and keep it short. Chilling Reign is a stud of a set. Like, the top 20 cards are absolutely gorgeous. And I'm not saying that it has a weak lineup. You got the Kickin' Chicken at the very top, which is freaking awesome, right? You got a gold Snorlax in there. You got Zapdos in there. Like, you got some big names, but really when you look at the top 20, there are some cards up there that aren't the biggest names in the whole Pokemon space. So when I look at Chilling Reign and I see how it's been able to perform over the long run, it's going to be interesting to me to see how long it can hold on, or if it can, or if it continues to grow in value from a singles card perspective. I don't know. Now, if you look right here, there is a lot of red on that Chilling Reign side, right? A whole lot of it is coming down. The other thing that I thought was really cool on this slide is I did a little bit of a deep dive into Battle Styles. And Battle Styles, and I'm not saying it's going to be a great set. I'm not saying everybody should rush out and buy Battle Styles because it's some unsung hero that's all of a sudden going to spike in price. I think the market has had enough time to judge Battle Styles, and the market just says, we don't care how awesome you are. You're not going to be a top tier set, which is fine. But when you look at the top 4 singles cards from Battle Styles and you compare them to some of the big sets, you compare it to Silver Tempest, you compare it to Brilliant Stars, you compare it to Astral Radiance, Battle Styles has a better top 4 from a value perspective than the other 4. The price of the top 4 in Battle Styles is actually higher than the top 4 in Astral Radiance. It's actually higher than the top 4 in Brilliant Stars. And outside of the Lugia is higher than the Sleepy T-Tar, but 2, 3, and 4 in Battle Styles is higher than 2, 3, and 4 in Silver Tempest. Like, that is absolutely crazy to think about, yet Battle Styles is an unloved set. And I get it, it doesn't have trainer galleries. It was the first set that had real alt arts in the Sword and Shield era, but Battle Styles doesn't get a ton of love, but it does have some really cool cards in there with some really awesome artwork, and at least from a price perspective, it's holding up against some of the big names in the Sword and Shield block. Now, of course, if we're going to talk Battle Styles, we've got to talk about Sleepy T-Tar, and here it is right here. And again, this one did really similar to the price movement that we saw for the overall market, but it did start to flatten out a little bit earlier. Again, is it like a 140 card? Is that where this thing's going to find support? It certainly seems to be doing now. I love this card. I love the artwork. I love the fact that it tells a little bit of a story and it's got some humor to it, right? T-Tar ate so freaking much, it's passed out. Like, I love everything about this card. And again, you can't argue with the value of those top 4 cards in Battle Styles compared to some of the other big sets. So just a really interesting takeaway for me. Again, I think the market has already weighed and measured it. It is what it is, but it's a really compelling case for some love to the Battle Styles set as well. Next ones, we're getting into the final 4 now. Vivid Voltage. Vivid Voltage was printed into the ground thanks to the pandemic. Pokemon Company did exactly what they should have done, right? When everybody was FOMOing and they were, scalping Vivid Voltage, they printed it into the ground. That's fine. It is what it is. But, you got the Chunkachu up top, which I think is going to be a little bit iconic, at least in the long run, because that was the big chase card during the pandemic. And again, this is another card. If you've watched this series, it got down to $100 at one point. We said, hey, listen, This is not a $100 card, right? Like the market might have it at $100 right now, but at least this is very, very close to a strong support line. And we've seen the Chunkachu jump up. It's near $120 right now, which is really cool. And then Darkness Ablaze is just a great lesson for all of us. Like just because you have a Charizard in there certainly doesn't mean that it is going to be a huge set, right? The Charizard needs more than just a Charizard, right? Like when I looked at this Darkness Ablaze Charizard, matter of fact, I'll pull it up right now. When I looked at this Charizard, it has had a very rough year. It is down 21% over the last year. And then I went into PSA as I always do, and there's 18,000 of these in PSA 10 holders. It's got a 76% gem rate, which is way up there. So, you know, the sets, hey, I'm not saying Obsidian Flames is Darkness Ablaze. I think Obsidian Flames is better, right? We all know Obsidian Flames gem rate is much lower. I know that the Charizards didn't turn out to be these huge chase Charizards for the Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet era in Obsidian Flames, but I do think that it is going to perform much better than Darkness Ablaze because I think it just has more to it overall. So poor Charizard might be under $20 next time we do this video, which would be I don't know, I just think it'd be really sad, but it'll be what it'll be. I can't control it. Final sets right here. Rebel Clash and Sword and Shield, and you see a lot of green just like you did on some of the previous slides, but these are base sets. These are the beginning of the era. They didn't have a very high jumping off point, a lot of low dollar cards on here. But if you look at Sword and Shield, I mean, you got those two Snorlax cards up there. You know, got the Rainbow one at number 1, that's up 11%. You got the Marnie at number 2, that's up 3%. And then you got the other full art Snorlax there, which is up 4%. So, I mean, it's a cool opportunity to get some great cards with a little bit of age to them. They're not going to break the bank. I think it'd be really fun to, you know, get them to some collectors and get them to some kids' hands, and I don't know, start getting people excited about some of the older stuff and not just the ultra modern, which I think is really important. I think it's really important to get new collectors and people who are into the hobby and the younger kids not just excited about what they're opening today, but get them interested in some of the stuff that happened prior to them actually joining the hobby. So some big takeaways here, and the interesting thing to me was we can fundamentally say, and I feel strongly in this and I'll stand behind it, that the first 4 sets in Scarlet and Violet were better than the first 4 sets in Sword and Shield. I truly believe that. But what I'm wondering is, are the middle 4 sets of Scarlet and Violet better than the middle 4 sets of Sword and Shield? We might have to do some data dives on that. We might have to do some research, but it's going to be interesting to kind of figure out where they're at. So if the first 4 are stronger, the middle 4 are weaker, what do we have in the back end of Scarlet and Violet? We'll have to see. But the one thing I did want to call out before we do that, as I said, is there's some really cool artwork to be had. Not everything has to be a $20, $30, $50, $100 card. Not everything has to be a Moonbreon, which will perform well in all markets. Like you look at this Snorlax right here, it's a $15 card. The artwork is fantastic. It's great to get in the hands of younger collectors and get them excited about some things from the past. And I just think it's awesome for the hobby in general. So listen, if you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you more than I can say. I hope you have an epic one. If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, I'd appreciate it if you thought long and hard about it. It goes a long way in helping my channel out. I hope you have a great one. Thank you so much for watching. See everybody. Bye.